Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Gil Penalosa, and this is the bi-weekly webinar, Cities for Everyone, where every other week we have fascinating people talking about important topics related to cities and people, creating cities that are more equitable, sustainable, and fun, where everyone can live healthier and happier. Originally, I'm from Bogota, Colombia, where I led the construction of hundreds of parks and increasing the ciclovia and open street from a few kilometers into 120, the world's largest pop-up park. But for the last 25 years, I have lived in Toronto, Canada, a city that I love and where I created the nonprofit organization 880 Cities and also Cities for Everyone. I've been fortunate to have worked in over 350 cities. Actually, today I'm working in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a beautiful city where God was very generous, gave it beautiful mountains and river, and people are making a city for people. I'm today at the offices of the Chattanooga Design Studio, who are my host for this week. So thank you, Chattanooga Design Studio. By the way, next week I'm going to be in Miami working on Safe Streets. But today we are here because we have a great guest, my good friend Ethan Kent. And Ethan is going to talk about placemaking. He's going to talk about how people power places, placemaking, how to engage people, how to hear people, how to make sure that it's places created by people, for people, and not just something top down where the community engagement becomes just a check mark. Ethan, thank you very, very much for having accepted this invitation. We got over 400 people from more than 20 countries eager to hear and learn from you.
So excited to be here, Gil. How are you?
Very good. I'm in Chattanooga. Wonderful. And in Chattanooga is such a magnificent city that it has mountains, it has a river, God was very generous. And people have done a lot of good things, but of course they could do even more. When I've been walking around Chattanooga, I thought of you, Ethan, about the power of 10. What if Chattanooga had 10 really great places? And if you went to each one of them, each one would have another 10 great things to do, and the 10 and 10 and 10, but you're going to explain it much better than anybody else. Ethan, welcome. People are here because they are eager to listen from you. We have people from all over the world. You have worked all over the world. I've worked with you in Poland and in Mexico and many cities in the US and South America, but you have such broad experience. So tell us about PlacemakingX and how everybody on this call, we have people, hundreds and hundreds of people for over 30 countries. What can we do? How can PlacemakingX help us on this? This is something that we are really, really looking forward to.
Well, thank you so much, Gil, for having me as part of your webinar, and always love any chance to work with you, to listen to you. I think I've heard you speak 50 times. Every time I learn more. And I've been lucky to work with you, I think, in almost 10 countries. And and there's one of the best things we can do for public space advocacy is certainly get your message out, and the global community and network that you've built is really a top-notch group of leaders. And so I'm honored to get to speak with many of them, and I recognize many people on the call. So this is a wonderful community to be part of, and I look forward to a conversation at the end. But I will start my.
Please share your screen
Yeah.
and all the images. By the way, Ethan, this community of cities for everyone, we turn off the chat during the presentation. We turn it off right after because we want people to do lots of comments on the chat before you start the presentation and also afterwards. But during the presentation, we want people to focus on you. But the Q&A is open so that when we have the dialogue, most of it is based on the questions that people are sending. Thanks, Ethan.
Yeah. So thank you, Gil. So I'm going to talk today about how the placemaking movement has evolved and what's most needed for overcoming the biggest obstacles we have, and really how we can do that through networking, the learning, the advocacy, and the action. And so this community on the call has extraordinary wisdom, experience, and stories to tell. And we think to really support us all in our communities, we need to connect. We need to show we're not alone. We need to show how we each have pieces of the solutions, of the wisdom that's needed. And we need to support each other. We need to show the collective advocacy that our collective power can enable. So that's really what placemaking has actually been about for decades at the very local level. And increasingly, when I was at Project for Public Spaces for 25 years, I worked in 1,000 communities and over 40 countries, and been to over 60 countries now, working with leaders on public space projects. But we always found that the limiting factor wasn't the knowledge. People knew a lot there. They understood the challenges, but it was how we could connect people locally, how we could build their capacity to create new systems for overcoming their challenges, and then connect people regionally and globally as well. So I'm going to talk about how PlacemakingX has been helping to do that. We founded that about 5 years ago. It spun it off from Project for Public Spaces to focus on the movement building that had emerged, that PPS helped launch about 10 years ago. And so I'll talk all about that. But we're seeing public space in many ways, thanks to Gil's leadership and even his father's leadership, many decades ago. We're seeing people's awareness for public space as a cause. And we don't see this as a competing cause, but one that draws out the best and challenges and inspires many adjacent causes. And people are seeing how a focus on place can bring about systemic change, can create broader collaboration and resourcefulness, and sort of move us out of our silos. So whether it's sustainability or architecture design, we need a lot of the solutions are known within these professions and within these causes, but they're not being applied fast enough. And we think it's because we're not developing the systems through which we apply them. And so we'll talk later about place governance and how that can draw out the best in a lot of these solutions and disciplines. But we have a global crisis right now. And one of the weaknesses in placemaking in public spaces is it's many crises. And that nobody's job is to create places, and it's in placemaking address these many disparate issues. But most recently, I think the cause has been best defined by a crisis of social isolation and loneliness that's being identified and quantified around the world now. But more fundamentally, it's a pattern of placelessness. Well, if you Google the future of cities, this is the image or images like this that come up first. And this sort of has been ingrained into our mind that this is development, this is wealth, this is power. But really, this is place taking. This is a monoculture of development in many ways the US culture has imposed, and other parts of the world are copying this in the worst ways. And so this is Jakarta, in a way, this is how this is actually manifests itself, how it's built, where you can't walk, you can't connect, and people in different buildings may never connect with each other. And even beautiful architecture, there's Frank Gehry's architecture, this celebrates, civilization, what great architecture can do, but it doesn't add to public space. And in fact, these two men, after I took this picture, mugged a couple. And I learned from police afterwards that people get mugged right here all the time. The building's designed to support this essentially social isolation and loneliness and patterns of crime in this case. So development and design has been privatizing space and been place taking essentially. But probably the worst perpetrator of place taking and privatization of public spaces is, of course, how we plan for cars and traffic. That's happening all over the world. And, that's in Nairobi and Cuba and New Jersey. American culture is defined by driving around more and more and accomplishing less and less. We're degrading the very destinations where the transportation is meant to bring people to. But of course, New Jersey is actually where we first did a lot of work training traffic engineers, because they were just solving the wrong problem. They were asked to move cars rather than to create places and destinations to go to. And we did a lot of work in New York, starting the public plaza program, trying to get the former transportation commissioner before Jeanette Sedekon fired, and she then hired many of our staff to implement the public plaza program, including Times Square. We'd worked very intensively with the Times Square Alliance to develop a vision and make the case to businesses in the community to pedestrianize this space. But before doing that, we always recommend doing it later, quicker, cheaper, experimenting, to build momentum, to create ownership and participation in the space. And the fancy chairs didn't arrive, so they had to go to the hardware store, and that made it more informal and more comfortable, and help people realize this could happen anywhere. So, and this is actually back in Cuba, where cars don't dominate as much, and children feel safe in the streets and are able to feel ownership over the world beyond their home, and play and enjoy is actually more apparent in the streets. And in Nairobi, we've helped organize, there's annual placemaking week there for many years now, and they did some temporary activations that led to more permanent changes, but wouldn't have happened without this sort of more experimental participatory culture. And then Detroit may be the city where we had the most impact for many years, working with many different sectors and contexts, but most significantly in the downtown. And right when Detroit declared bankruptcy, we helped create a beach at the center of their central square, which we'd also worked on. They created this culture where people feel like they can help contribute to creating the city, not just consuming the city, but how everyone can compete to contribute to the shared experience, to the story, whether they've lived there for decades or are moving there. The creativity in Detroit and the energy downtown is one of the great transformation stories of any city. And then Mexico City, we've done a lot of work actually with Gil and Parque Mexico a long time ago, and in Coyoacan, I think about 15 years ago, we did a workshop in this space, and then more recently, Fundación Placemaking Mexico has done capacity building for programming, management, and governance of spaces there. So William H. White was one of the mentors of the placemaking movement, of my father as well. He said, it's hard to create a space that will not attract people. What's remarkable is how often this has been accomplished. And of course, this is Piazza del Campo in Siena, Italy. A very informal, loved space. But when architects have copied the form of it, it hasn't always worked. So that's what William White's talking about, is we can't just copy the form. We have to copy the process, the management, the governance, the informal and formal governance of the space that allowed people to take ownership over this. So design becomes more important. It's not design isn't important, but when design leads, it can dominate and be rigid and prevent the larger placemaking process that can yield more demand for good design and investment in the public realm. So we shape our public spaces thereafter our public spaces shape us. We don't realize how much we're shaped by them, but also how our culture and the way we participate in our cities is effectively shaping them. So placemaking is just really putting into practice the process of shaping our public realm. So this is, my father took this picture 30 years ago in Sydney, and I've been there a few times recently. We've worked there many times over the decades, but we worked on this project with the Transportation New South Wales that led to the pedestrianization with transit in this space in the same location. So progress is happening. Cities are being reclaimed from the automobile. But we're also challenging a lot of these cities that have become very livable, that are ranked the most livable cities in the world. There's a lot of Canadian cities and Australian cities have been awarded such, to challenge them to become lovable cities, because we think you can actually achieve livability more affordably, more quickly, more inclusively through a focus on place attachment and lovability. And I'll unpack that a little more later. But what is placemaking? First of all, I took this picture working with Gil in Mississauga, I think in 2005 or 6, and it's one of my favorite pictures. But because I remember how wonderful it was to work with him to do a campaign for placemaking for Mississauga that's still realizing some of its rewards. But placemaking, it's a collaborative process by which we can shape our public realm in order to maximize shared value. More importantly, there was an MIT study that found that the biggest benefit of placemaking was how it builds capacity and social capital through the process of placemaking. So even if you have the right answer and solution for what your public space should look like and how it should be designed and managed, it's the process that yields the potential, the joy, the connection, the ownership, and the creativity in many regards. So a few things of what placemaking is and what it's not. It's about creating places people love. It's people focused, it's inclusive and collaborative, it's visionary, but also practical. It's about doing and acting, as Gil always talks about. It's about letting go and sharing responsibility. It's flexible and it's adaptable. It's not just project driven. It's not design led or a master plan. It's not just an event or art or a piece of art. It always is how these things can leverage more. It's not just about the visible. It's about the social connections, as we said, and the invisible, the informal governance of a space and culture that's created. And it's never done by just one person or a team. There's often a catalyst, there's a leader, but that person leads in a way that allows lots of people to feel like they're leaders and to have different people lead at different times, and to build capacity for everyone to be a placemaker. So placemaking, it's a fuzzy word. It's jargon in some senses, but we found it's a really powerful word to organize around, and that this was a study done quite a while ago, but found that it was pretty equally used around the world with subtle different meanings. And part of the reason we think that's useful to network the conversation globally is because everyone has different strengths and weaknesses around placemaking, and collectively they actually balance each other out and they keep each other in check, and they prevent placemaking from being co-opted by one sector or discipline or ideology or demographic. And so collectively, the answers again are there. We need to network that wisdom and learning. But the history of the placemaking movement, which is a word we only started using in the 90s to really describe the processes we developed at Project for Public Spaces to put into practice the work of Jane Jacobs and William White. And my father worked with them in the very early 70s after he organized the first Earth Day in New York City. And he worked for the mayor at the time and founded Transportation Alternatives, but then founded Project for Public Spaces in 1975 to put into practice, really William White's work and Jane Jacobs, who were all set up by the Rockefeller Family Foundation and Rockefeller Center. Some of our first projects at PPS were Rockefeller Center and then Bryant Park. But we started calling the tools and processes we developed over the next 20 years. We started calling them placemaking in the mid to late 90s, and started to see those tools and processes really catch on as a global movement around 2006. And then we started to try to organize and connect those leaders in 2013. We launched with UN Habitat a series of conferences meant to make public space and placemaking a global cause, to get it into the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and the New Urban Agenda. And we started with a conference in Detroit, actually, in 2013, and another one in Stockholm and Buenos Aires that Gil came and spoke at, and one in Pittsburgh as well that Gil spoke at. And the goal at that time was to really support the movement for about 5 years, but then try to help it self-organize, so not to decentralize by 2018. And so that's when we spun off PlacemakingX to focus on supporting and connecting this sort of more self-organized leadership that had been emerging around the world. And Cecilia Martinez, who Gil knows as well, was at UN Habitat when she helped us launch this global cause, and with Future of Places, and she said that we're creating a global movement to shape spaces into places, we see as places really giving purpose and meaning to space. Or adding, it's always additive, and there's lots of layers that people can project onto it, and it's usually very, very little. The conflict usually is creative. There's it's more nuanced there for sure. In Quito, where Gil and I actually were brought in before the Habitat 3 covers to do training and build capacity for their public realm to host the conference. One of the great things that came out of the Quito's, besides this SDG 11.7, which was for public space, and we got our key principles of public space and placemaking into the New Urban Agenda, was also something called the Quito Papers that Saskia Sassen and Dr. Close and Richard Sennett developed, where they said that cities and public spaces need to be incomplete, porous, and complex, which was sort of anti-intuitive at the time. And they said public spaces need multiple uses, flexibility, and more informality. And that gets to, again, the sort of focus on the lovability to achieve livability more inclusively. So, and one of the key principles we launched the placemaking movement with was something my father always says, is that everyone has the right to live in a great place, but more importantly, everyone has the right to contribute to making the place where they already live great. And so, we think, one of the global crisis is that we're at a low point perhaps in how we participate in shaping the public realm. And we need to challenge and support everyone to be partners and to realize they have ideas, wisdom, resources to contribute to the public realm in some sense. And we're not going to achieve the change that we need, the change that a lot of advocates and disciplines, know is needed without developing the mechanisms and processes to include everyone in shaping the public realm more constructively and more efficiently. So to build the placemaking movement, we've helped organize conferences in many corners of the world, and this is just some of them. But each of these conferences has helped launch local and regional networks and had strengths around certain parts of placemaking, whether the types of public spaces or issues or demographics that need to be included in the placemaking conversation, indigenous placemaking or developers, working with developers or government and so forth. And so PlacemakingX it's a network to accelerate placemaking for global impact. And our mission is to be a network of leaders who together accelerate placemaking as a way to create healthy, inclusive, and beloved communities. And everyone's welcome to join as an advocate, and we help connect and organize these communities around cross-cutting agendas, which I'll talk about, and around regional networks. The vision of PlacemakingX is to make the spaces we live into places we love, to create a thriving, equitable, and sustainable world through the convergence of values, passion, and action around our public spaces. And so these are some of the regional and national networks we've helped to start and support. A lot of them have conferences, and Gil's been involved with many of these. Recently, there's ones that have launched actually in Thailand and Mongolia and the Philippines as well. And next week I'm going to Doha, as Qatar has recently launched a placemaking network as well. And there's many others in some European countries like Placemaking Poland and that have launched recently as well. But each one of these have websites and social media that we encourage you to connect with and please connect with and support your regional network. So these are some of the ones that have websites and social media platforms that you can engage with and contribute to. And so most recently, we had our first global placemaking summit in Mexico City. These are bringing together the leaders of many of these regional networks and also starting to form and create cross-cutting agendas around topics. And so this, the model of PlacemakingX is not to create an institution or to centralize anything. It's very decentralized. We really have, almost no funding. We get our funding similar to how Gil does through talks and trainings but so this is the network's based on, this is when we started this actually 10 years ago. This came out from Harvard Business Review about sort of old power and new power values. And, we see the new power is really the model with which PlacemakingX has been developed. It's informal, it's open source collaboration, crowd wisdom, radical transparency, do it ourselves, maker culture, short-term affiliation. So people that are involved are always bridgers of different networks, disciplines, of different demographics, and they contribute when they can. And it's so we're very lucky to have hundreds of leaders really helping to shape and grow the placemaking movement. But so how do we do this? How do we scale, and how do we connect everybody into the placemaking conversation wherever they are? The Power of 10, as Gil mentioned, is a engagement tool, but also a framework for shaping cities and engaging people. And our theory is that a great city or town even needs at least 10 great public destinations, and that you sort of turn upside down the shaping of it from just looking at the skyline or economic development or whatever crisis they have to how do we make these great public destinations work, and how can that shape how a city is perceived and participated in locally and globally. And a good destination needs at least 10 places, and then a great place needs at least 10 things to do in it. So with New York as an example, we think New York's perception locally and globally has been most transformed by these public destinations, and how they're designed and how they look is important, but really the story of transformation is what's most inspiring and what should most be learned from and replicated. Don't copy the form of the High Line, copy the process and the governance and the nonprofits that have emerged out of this. There's lots to learn from each of those. And we've been involved in key moments at each of these, but really it's the leaders locally that deserve all the credit. And have learned what's needed to make these places work. Their story from being against something in most cases, from being a NIMBY in many cases, to moving the energy from being for something, to being a facilitative leader and letting other people share in that vision and share in the implementation. But each of these destinations works at the human scale, at the place scale. And it's that's the scale where human connection is made, where we have memories, where the social triangulation occurs. And that occurs because there's excuses to be in those spaces. So we think again, the design becomes more important, but we think in the placemaking process, you really want to think about the layering of uses. Jane Jacobs talked a lot about that, the sort of the interminglings of different uses. But it's really at this human scale that cities fail and succeed, and that few people plan and design them. And so Bryant Park, as Gil knows, is one of the very most actively managed and programmed spaces, and always evolving and changing thanks to the management of the space. And my father did an early conceptual plan, a master plan for it that introduced these ideas at a time when we were designing spaces in this, in the 70s and early 80s out of fear of people using spaces. And if we did look at uses, it was separating out uses, and rather than helping them intermingle. And it was always out of fear of the quote undesirable. And so one of the early ideas that William White and PPS really pushed in US downtowns was they said the best way to deal with the quote problem of undesirables was actually to make the place attractive to everybody else, to not let any use or user group dominate. And now, of course, that's becoming a big challenge again in a lot of downtowns. So PPS is really focused on some creative ways of engaging the homeless community in placemaking and taking ownership over the space, and more holistically addressing the issues of unhoused in US cities, but everywhere. So the Power of 10 is an exercise we've done we've trained governments all over the world. This is in Melbourne. Often all the departments that affect placemaking don't even talk to each other about placemaking, but when you do this exercise, they quickly realize that they can organize together, and they can collaborate, and that their cities that nobody's really been in charge of creating great places. They've been in charge of streets and roads or parks or buildings, or but not how do we make them great places? How do we leverage the great investment that we're already making in the public realm and collaborate with local communities to make them great places? So Melbourne was a livable city, but it wasn't that livable. It didn't have the places that people loved. It had a lot of places people avoid. They looked nice. They had good urban design, good mode shift, nice wide sidewalks, but they weren't places. They were places to move through still, and they were. It's a more expensive approach, just livability, in many ways. But it's also relevant in favelas. We did this exercise in Rio, and the form of different favelas can be similar, but it's a product more of how its spaces are informally managed and programmed that leads to their impact, their success. This is in Cali, Colombia, doing this exercise with a team from Gale actually as well, where the wisdom and potential action and participation of the community is unleashed through these types of exercises. So it won't be able to go too far into it, but placemaking should look at all different types of public spaces as an opportunity, whether it's bus stops or main streets, local streets and roads, parks, plazas, markets. We do a lot of work with public markets, vending, looking at cities holistically as market cities that need a full spectrum of informal to formal retail. We're doing a lot of articles this month through the Social Life Project on markets that you can look at. Waterfronts are some of my favorite projects to work on because they're the face of the city, and all the different conflicts. It's the process of developing the identity of the city, and how they're often planned for single uses, and how do they come together around great destinations that draws out the best in many different functions. Libraries, hospitals, or public buildings, schools, religious institutions are all great partners in placemaking, and cultural institutions. But it's always about more than just that building. It's about how they're a catalyst and a partner to the buildings around them. And then, of course, the biggest limiting factor and biggest opportunity is, besides transportation, is development, and how development can go from place taking to placemaking. And we talk about place-led development as what's really going to most drastically affect our land use and enable development that adds to the public realm and benefits accordingly. And we got to make that go viral to address our biggest challenges. So how do you do that? It's, again, just quickly about the public process. It's traditional planning engages people, does the design, and hope it gets used. Placemaking is much more iterative and responsive. In most very well-intended planning processes, in the States and beyond, require public input, but it's done after the problem's been defined by the discipline or by government, and it's out of fear. So you get a very reactive, angry engagement. Usually very crisis-driven, politically initiated, it's expensive, leads to sort of big projects, limited ownership, limited participation. So the placemaking process really turns it inside out. It's upside down. We use the power of 10. We have different exercises called the place game that we developed at PPS to train people to do this. We've trained people in thousands of communities to do these exercises themselves. PPS still does trainings. Many other organizations do too, and as do we. But it changes the relationship to challenge the communities to be owners of the process and to be facilitators and co-implementers. And the experts inform, facilitate as well, but it builds capacity, and you start to experiment and do that shows what's possible and grows momentum. So placemaking can be initiated by anyone. There are aspects of placemaking that are about, government-led or that are more action-focused, more planning-focused, more community-led. This diagram is developed by Placemaking Education, which is a program we've helped develop with Town Teams movement in Australia. They provide very affordable and a lot of free training opportunities for placemakers. A lot of it's geared towards government, the role of government, and because that's really where we're learning most about how the role of government can be reinvented to support placemaking in Australia and New Zealand. And in some of those cities are starting to reevaluate, restructure their evaluation of success around place capital metrics, looking at the shared value of the public realm. And people have heard of, social capital and human capital and cultural capital. And we see place capital as perhaps the one that has the most synergies and is often the least invested in and often disinvested in. So we're trying to develop the case for how we can disrupt corporate capitalism and extractive capitalism with place capitalism as a comfortable but also disruptive way of weaning us from the very extractive crisis we find ourselves in today. And we think the evolution of development and investment has to move from being project driven to being place led, where the most progressive wing of many disciplines in government is still place sensitive, and we need those solutions. We need, but we also need to move towards an enabling model where we're building the capacity of everyone to participate in creating great destinations the goal, creating great places the goal. So I won't go too far in depth on that, but this is some of the thinking that's come out of actually Australia a lot, is that governance today is different departments have very narrow ways of measuring their success and very narrow solution sets, but they're all affecting the public realm in different core ways. And they're starting to look at placemaking and place management and as part of their work. But where we think they need to move to is place-led governance, and all benefiting from and contributing to those shared goals and more systemically addressing their goals, whether it's tourism or safety or accessibility or economic development. And so moving the conversation from a narrow goal to how do we all create great places? Everyone has something to contribute to that. Everyone can be passionate about great places. But how do we build these placemaking campaigns? This is what we launched at our Global Placemaking Summit in Mexico City. There's leadership networks around each of these topics that are coalescing the work that's been done and the work that now needs to happen on, whether it's placemaking for women or placemaking for children. And I think Norhan's on the call, who's helping to lead the placemaking for women agenda. And on the summit website, you can see the results, the drafts that each of the groups have developed on, what are the biggest obstacles and opportunities and what should next steps happen to advance these topics, which people are contributing to from all over the world. Another great resource for supporting your local placemaking community and campaign is the Social Life Project. This is the project my father runs. He's written hundreds of articles on what he's learned over his 50+ year career studying public spaces and working on them in thousands of communities all over. This is a passion project of his. They're all free, and he's taking pictures of public spaces everywhere. And he was on Gil's webinar a couple of years ago, so you can watch that webinar as well. But any placemaking campaign should combine advocating for systemic change with amplifying the stories of placemaking of goods, and then looking at how do we accelerate impact? How do we connect the dots and go deeper? So some steps to organize your local placemaking campaign: organize a local meeting. The people, the passion's always there. People often don't know each other even across the street. And we want people, whoever's leading it, we celebrate, but we always look at who is not invited, what discipline or demographic is not included, to balance it out, to not let any idea or demographic dominate. Collectively define the problem and the potential. We use the Power of 10 and the place game to do those different exercises and help people move beyond their sort of solution set or their expertise sometimes, to look at place a little more holistically and make sure we're defining the problem correctly. It's not always a traffic problem or an economic development problem. Start with a community vision, not a plan. A vision, something people can get on board with. It's not, you don't quickly move the conversation to your discipline's language or sort of rarefied language or drawing, design even. It's allowing people to feel like the vision's theirs as well. And then you can use the place game as a way to help people realize they have expertise and articulate their vision and come up with ideas, and then actually be part of the action and the implementation. And it's always the unlikely partners, the unlikely participants that add the specialness to the place, that make it really theirs, and embrace debate. The negative person or the crisis in a public space, and I'm about to wrap up, Gil, here, is actually can often be the most useful. Again, I mentioned how a lot of placemaking processes started because people were against something. That can be really useful energy. They're opposed to a development or a change to their community. How then the placemaking is a tool for challenging those people to then say what they want. And the person with a bad idea or a lot of negativity can help other people organize to be better. Don't be afraid of them. Look for how that person or that crisis can be positive in the placemaking process. And then don't wait for the big things to happen. Don't be scared by the big changes. Start with lighter, quicker, cheaper interventions, to experiment, to make mistakes. That's always good. You learn from them, create a conversation, create some tensions. And then look at how everyone's small action is part of a larger local, national, global campaign for turning upside down our world, to start with places and placemaking, and connecting us locally and globally through our shared love of each other, of humanity, of civilization. Public spaces and placemaking people are really the connective tissue through which we can sort of turn upside down our government, and our in an era where sort of nationalism and celebrities are defining the news. We need to turn upside down the way that our stories as humanities, to start with public spaces and really ground us in what matters most, and in the fundamental connection we have with each other and to our planet through placemaking. So I'm going to stop there. Look forward to questions. You can sign up on PlacemakingX.org and follow us on all social media as well. So thank you, Gil.
Ethan, thank you very, very much. We always ask the guests to provide a call to action. People sometimes feel hopeless. They want to feel hopeful. What can they do? They seem that sometimes, what am I going to do? I'm only one person. But this is not a time for anyone to be spectator. It's people to act. So what would be your call to action to the hundreds of people that are listening to you, that are connected because they want to hear your call to action? This is not an academic exercise. We want people to become passionate advocates on creating cities that are equitable and sustainable. So, Ethan, please close with your call to action.
So, as I said, placemaking is at every scale, and everyone has something they can do to contribute to placemaking, whether it's just spending time in public spaces in the front of your homes, to putting a bench on every corner, as my father is challenging everyone to do, to sort of help take back the intersection by being social at the corner. But I really think that how we build our networks of our collective social networks in our communities and connecting them at every scale globally is perhaps what's most important for building our capacity to act, and always connecting our relationship building with action and grounding it in public spaces and learning. But realizing how we all have key pieces of this and we need to network it globally. Gil and I have been lucky to be connected to, all the really the top urbanist minds around the world. We need to connect them globally. And Gil brought, so many of them on this webinar. So that's an incredible library of the best knowledge that you need to do placemaking in your communities. But a lot of the best knowledge is also in your community. So these are all, think of, you're connected to, at your fingertips, you have the resources, the tools you need, the people you need. We need to connect it. We need to just tell the story of how we're all doing this together. We're all learning together. We're keeping each other in check. We're making sure no one gets too far ahead of ourselves. Our egos don't get too big. And we're making this a collective story that disrupts and connects many other causes to more systemically address the deep challenges that are facing or preventing the potential future of humanity on this planet. So placemaking at its core is connecting us to each other and to place to sustain human life on this planet.
I think that is so, when you talk about systems, they say garbage in, garbage out. So keep in mind, in placemaking, probably the most important thing is people. If you only get a certain segment of the population or certain group, or you allow those public meetings to be taken over, either by the people that are against or a favor. No, you need a broad, you need children, you need adults, you need the retail, the schools, the faith groups. You really gotta focus on doing the effort or getting the proper people so that no one is taking over. And also always try convince cities that all projects should start with placemaking. The placemaking is the what. Don't start with the professionals. Don't start with the urban planners. Don't start with the architects. They come later. First, work with the community on the what. What do they want? When there is clarity on the what, then invite the professionals on the how. The community might say, we want to walk, but the community doesn't know if it should be 2 meters or 10 meters, if it should be an oval or spaghetti or what. No, that's what the professionals do know. But the community knows about the what. What a wonderful session, Ethan. Thank you very, very much. Thanks, everyone. I'm so grateful that we got people, hundreds of over 400 people today from more than 30 countries. Thank you very much. We are a community. I'll see you 2 weeks from today. Same time, same place. Ethan, all the best. Keep doing great work around the world. All the best with the placemaking networks.
Thank you, Gil. Your support's much appreciated, and a wonderful community and amazing questions. And feel free to get in touch with me with these questions or connect on LinkedIn or any social media. I appreciate it.
And your social media is, can you repeat it once more?
PlacemakingX, and and you can find me on LinkedIn.
.org. PlacemakingX. Okay. Take care.
Okay. Bye, Gil.
Ethan, thank you very, very much. You provided so many great examples from all over the world and so much clarity on what placemaking is and is not. I think that you presented a very powerful case why every project should always start with the community. The community is the expert. We should go and listen to the community on the what. Once we know what the community wants, then we can invite the experts, the planners, the urban designers, the financial people, and so on. But we always got to start with the what. Then we invite the others for the how. Thank you very much, Ethan. I hope that people will watch this presentation and share it with decision makers, elected officials, city staff, advocates, media, and also go to the YouTube channel and watch this and other presentations, and also share the others. And I'll see you every other Tuesday, same time. Thank you very much. I'm very, very grateful to people that see it, watch it live, as well as the people that watch the recordings and share with other people.